Welcome to Lizzie's Bedtime Stories, episode 42. I am welcoming Nat Burns to the show. Welcome on the show, and I'm very excited to listen to the two readings that you have for us.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for asking me to come on your show. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. I have this persistent childlike adoration of having somebody read to me.
It's not a bad thing.
No, it isn't. And so it's my self-indulgent reason for creating the series in general, because I like when people read to me.
Well, hopefully this will make you feel all warm and cozy.
Yay! So, you are going to be reading from a novel that's coming out next month?
Yes, February, from Bella Books.
Woohoo!
I know, I'm excited. I have two coming out this year, and it's good. I only had one come out in 2000. I had two come out in 2013. That's right. I had Gospel with Regal Crest, and then I had Poison Flowers with Bella.
So this reading that you're going to do, it's not the first chapter. You've chosen a little bit deeper in.
No, I'm going to read from chapter 7, but I want to set it up by reading a little bit of an overview and telling you a little bit about what the story entails.
Okay.
And what I put together is vandalism and violence at Fortune Farm have pulled investigator Denni Watkins home to southern Louisiana. Her insistent ex-girlfriend, Patty Price, expects Denni to get to the bottom of an endless nightmare of trouble. For Denni, it means watching Patty with Yolanda Cousins, the creepy, conniving lowlife who stole Patty away from her. Denni had hoped Patty was exaggerating, but the chaos at the farm borders on pure evil. The Price family is well loved, but nothing has been right since the death of Patty's mother. A war-crazy neighbor and a business competitor are just the beginning on a list of suspects. But just as Denni feels she's making progress, Yolanda asks for help from an old friend from her police officer days, an officer named Benita Corcoran. The move is so typical of Yolanda. It's an already difficult situation, but now Denni must deal with the most attractive, seductive woman she has ever met. And this is Denni talking. I loved summers at Fortune Farm in southwestern Louisiana. The hot sun rising in the east behind the lush greenery of cane and hay always seemed like such a new beginning, much more so than Virginia's mountain-buried mornings. The flat 200 acres of Price farmland stretched as far as the eye could see, all the way to the Sabine River on the west and almost into Lake Charles on the east. The southernmost part bordered on Sabine Lake, and from there one could nearly see into Port Arthur, Texas. Some of the land currently lay fallow, while other acres burgeoned with dark green sugarcane or waving hay grass. "All right, Patty, what's going on here?" I asked the next morning as we walked across the cleared field behind the house. We had gotten a late start, mostly because I had overslept, tired from my day of travel. I had fallen into bed asleep, I believe even before my head hit the pillow. The family and I had taken our time over one of Annie's excellently prepared breakfasts to catch up on new times and reminisce about old. Now we were still taking our time. Kissy ran ahead, leaping across the tough hillocks of grass that marked this seldom-used southern end of the property. Human, the dog, ran along beside her, racing ahead and then running back as if to tease her for not keeping up. Our path converged onto a wide, dark dirt drive lying parallel to a long, low barn-like building. Huge serpentine tractors filled orderly bays. They'd been repaired, gas cartridges and fuel lines replaced, and rested, awaiting active duty. "What?" Patty stopped and gazed curiously at me. "John Clyde and Londa, what's the deal?" "I don't know. About a year ago, they started getting on one another's nerves. Then when Mama died, it seemed to get worse. I'm not sure why. I used to think he plain didn't like her, but now, maybe it's jealousy, like I spend too much time with her." "I disagree. Look how much time y'all spend together working on this place. You and John Clyde are together every day." "I know," Patty agreed, "but we're not working together so much. I'm not sure what his problem is. And getting someone to talk about something around here is like pulling teeth." "What about Londa? You trust her?" "Sure, why wouldn't I? We've been together 4 years now, and I've never seen her do anything that aroused doubt. She paused and studied me. She's a good gal, Denny. Even you'd like her if you got to know her. I turned away, speechless. What could I say? I did not like Wanda, and it wasn't all because Patty chose her over me. Some of it was a difference in personalities. I saw her as a blurred character. She had no definition. I like things cut and dried. So how did you discover the tractors had been tampered with? I asked her. John Clyde did. He came out with a crew of men to start cutting the hay on Cross Bottom. He was pissed. Some of the tank caps had even been tossed in the high grass over there. He was hung over from the night before, so he was especially obnoxious. I looked in the direction she pointed. Has he been drinking a lot? We paused, and I walked a short way into the high weeds. A wind was blowing from the west, drying the layer of sweat that covered my brow. Yeah, I'm worried about that. Amy told me about 3 weeks ago that our liquor bill was way up. He never drank this much when Mama was alive. She sighed, and her face took on a pained, frightened expression. I'm so tired, Denny. Maybe us moving into the house here was a big mistake. It seems like so much more is asked of me now. I'm not so sure I have it in me to keep on pretending everything will be all right. It will, I hastened to reassure her. I hope so. Listen, I'll leave you to your PI stuff. We'll be over at East Quarter if you need me. East Quarter? Patty grinned, no doubt remembering how I never could grasp all the pet names the Prices had assigned to various segments of farmland. Just follow the Sabine south and you'll find us. I looked west to where the wide Sabine River traveled the edge of Price land and north toward the lake, and then the mighty Gulf of Mexico. Rudy Bayou. Where's that? I asked. South of here, where the Sabine meets the lake, before the beaches. You want me to take you over now? I thought Sabine Lake was all industrial now. Patty nodded, but she was clearly anxious to get to work. Most of it is. It was still pretty when I was real little. You remember they had the parks and the beaches? Well, it's different now. There's several plans underway, though, to reclaim some parks, and there's still some pretty areas. Rudy was originally too rocky and grown up for the boats to come in, but that squall we had a couple of years ago cleaned out a lot of the crap. I'm sure someone will come and develop it once John Clyde and I pass on. What about Kissy? She'll get the farm unless John Clyde decides to have some kids. Yeah, but will I care then? Hell, she's probably a lot more progressive than any of us. She'll probably sell out and move to a condo in California. I laughed, agreeing with her. I believe you're right about that. Patty turned suddenly and looked to her left. I heard it then, too. It was human, barking with a sharp staccato sound. Then Kissy's voice reached us. She was screaming for help. By the time we reached Kissy, she had quieted, as if accepting her fate. She was chin-deep in a sinkhole of water and dark, sandy sludge. Ribbons of murky, viscous mud framed her round, oddly calm eyes. Human raced back and forth along the edge of the sinkhole, clearly frustrated at being unable to rescue her. His whines of fear raised gooseflesh on my arms. Kissy, oh, baby, what happened? Patty said as she lay on her stomach and tried to reach Kissy. Her hands fell a foot or so short. I don't know, Mom, Pat. We were running and... She lifted one hand to reach toward her mother and abruptly sank 2 inches. Damn, it's quicksand, Patty muttered. You're not serious, I said. I could only stare in horror as the child struggled to keep her mouth above the slimy, sandy mud. Then I started looking around for something, anything to throw in and use to pull the girl out. Be still, baby, Patty called to Kissy. Denny, hold on to my legs. I'm going to grab her. I threw myself on the ground and tightened my arms around both of Patty's denim-clad calves. She had on work boots, and I was grateful for that as it made a better handle against my shoulders. We inched forward, more of Patty's upper body gradually advancing above the lower level of the muck in the sinkhole. Whoa, wait! She gasped as an elbow was sucked down into the mud. She turned her body, easing the arm loose as her other arm reached toward Kissy. The child's mouth was in mud now, and I could see only her panicked eyes and sand-covered nose as she struggled for air. I inched Patty forward with new urgency. Get her, Patty. We don't have much time, I said through gritted teeth. I'm trying, damn it, Patty growled. She began to sob, in frustration, I'm sure, but she never paused as she stretched herself as far over the trench as possible, looping one arm about Kissy's head, plunging her other hand under the quicksand in search of Kissy's armpit. She needed a way to lever the child out because the heavy, saturated mud was pulling against her. Pull me, Denny. Pull hard. This won't be easy, she gasped. I looked up one more time and saw her trying to blow wet sand from Kissy's nostrils as she lifted her slightly. I dug in the toes of my sneakers and, using my hips and elbows, edged away from the muddy sinkhole. I wrapped my arms more tightly around Patty's legs and pulled as hard as I could. It seemed as though hours passed, but I was eventually able to roll myself into a sitting position and pull both of them to safety, digging in my heels and using my full body weight and my arm strength. We rolled apart and I fell back, my arms quivering from the exertion. Kissy, clearly frightened by the experience, cuddled into Patty's lap and popped one dirty, sand-caked thumb into her mouth. She stared at me with wide, blank eyes. Patty had her own eyes closed and was holding her daughter tightly, rocking to and fro and uttering soothing sounds. I watched them, my heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm. Studying the sinkhole, I was perplexed. I didn't remember anything like this from years ago when Patty and I had stolen kisses while walking the grounds of Fortune. The hole was huge, almost 8 feet in diameter. The rippled sand and wet black dirt center was about 18 inches lower than the surrounding firmer soil. "What is this thing, Patty?" I gasped, trying deep breaths in to calm myself. "Have you always had drop-offs like this?" No. She stopped rocking, but her hands still worked to clean and calm the eerily silent child in her lap. "It's normal this close to sea level, though. I think it was that storm we had. It cleared out a lot of protective stuff that kept the land solid. I bet the water's been seeping in since and undermining the land." "Does John Clyde know about this?" She shook her head, anger replacing the paralyzing fear she'd probably felt before. "No, how could he? I told you, this has never happened before." "You need to do a sound survey. This is dangerous as hell." Patty ignored my pedantic rambling and started rocking again. I stood. "Let's get y'all home." Patty sighed and tried to rise. Kissy cried out and clung to Patty, momentarily knocking her off balance. I reached to steady them and held them both close for a good long time. And that's chapter 7.
Hoo-wee! Oh my God, that's nail-biting stuff right there.
Well, I wanted to make it an adventuresome novel.
That poor toddler, you're so mean. First she gets whacked and she's missing hair from it getting tugged out of her head.
I know.
And then she's in quicksand.
I know. But it all plays toward the end of the novel when you find out why all this stuff is happening. So, it's one of the main clues.
Dun, dun, dun. Well, I was here during the Superstorm Sandy, and the house was surrounded by water. And it took a while for them to let us back on our property because in a very small area, I don't even think we're a mile square, there are beaches one after the other. And there were 23 sinkholes. And one of the problems is because this used to be an inlet that eventually gathered sand, maybe 100 years ago. And then the bay and the ocean met, and what happened was the water was whooshing underneath some places, and some houses lifted right off their moorings and whatnot. So when I was listening to your reading, I was thinking about, oh my God, I'm glad that didn't happen when we were trying to leave after the water settled.
I know. I mean, look at what's happening in Florida. It's so bad. When, the sea, nature always wins out.
Yes.
And the mind can take whatever it wants,
It will take what it won't do.
That's right.
So you have a second reading that I believe is wildly divergent topically from this one.
Very much so. I don't know if you remember this one, but it's called The Rebels. Mm-hmm. And it's from Women in Uniform, Medics and Soldiers and Cops Oh My, which is by Vera Foster and Pat Cronin. They put this together and they asked me to write a little something for it. Mm-hmm. And I love sci-fi. I've always loved sci-fi. In fact, I earned my chops doing sci-fi and horror back in 1980 or something. So I've been writing sci-fi for a long time. So this is a sci-fi story, and the uniform was the thing. And so, Pat Cronin, she really liked it, and I'm going to read it to you now. And this is it's under one of my pseudonyms. I write under about, 5 or 6 pseudonyms, and this one is V.W. Massie, M-A-S-S-I-E. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read it for you right now.
Okay.
The Rebels by V.W. Massey. Although I couldn't see her face because the black visor was lowered, her body spoke to me. Long and lean, the soldier had the small, firm breasts and slim hips I preferred in a virtual lover. Setting the broadcloth over her flat stomach, I could almost feel the rail of muscle there. Border marchers were forced to train relentlessly. I knew she would be tight and hard beneath every inch of that dark uniform. Yet I was working out of my element. I was unsure of the exact customs of this rural crosstown. Were the traditions the same as in Bensonhurst? Many of the outposts resented our easy city ways. There was an old-style religious element still active in a number of them, touting the evils of man. Very different from our city center, which loudly proclaimed the goodness of man. The city was easy. When you met someone at a glow-light bar or social function, you passed them your rendezvous chip and retreated immediately to the coupling couches or set up a tryst later using the chip. It hadn't always been this way. According to the history vids, it had started after the states went to war and implemented the protocol. When the soldiers had refused to leave their spouses and go fight, the Victor Alien Family Act of 2012 had been put in place to ease the absence of the men and women who had gone off to war. Virtual coupling had become big business very quickly. So much so that after the tragic blow of 2043, when the troops did not return, the coupling couches persisted, even in the face of a rapidly dwindling population. With state borders still needing protection and a shortage of soldiers, genetic blending had produced the Border Marchers, a tribe of elite soldiers whose sole purpose was to protect the remaining populace from terrorists. And they were spectacular, especially this one. I studied the marcher once more slyly and wondered if I should simply hand her my rendezvous as I would back home. I sighed. Was she watching me? I couldn't tell for sure. I imagined I could feel her gaze on me. My body tingled, and I knew with a sudden urge that I had to have her. I reached into my pocket for the rendezvous. The low hum sounded, and my heart lurched in dismay. The marcher turned right abruptly and trotted away along the border. I'd lost my chance. Commander Isaac? I drew my gaze from the marchers retreating back and saw a young MTF officer waiting expectantly. She was lovely, with small-boned features and a delicate body. She had yet to have the breast enhancements and so must still be very young. I found it odd that the few remaining men no longer wished to be men. Yes. Is she ready for me? Yes, my lady, if you'll come this way. The officer led the way into the huge Spartan building that made up this southwestern checkpoint. An expansive glass wall fronted on the line, and I found myself searching for my soldier. She must be a mile or so down the boundary by this point. I thought about her 4 hours of duty, the constant starts and stops as she patrolled the line, alternately jogging along to a new outpost and standing guard on alert. I thought of her muscular body bucking beneath mine and felt moisture well between my thighs. The officer was talking, so I reined in my rampant imagination. So tell me about the city, she whispered urgently. Is it as decadent as they say? I laughed. Define decadent. People live in much closer proximity there, so there's certainly more activity in the city. I kept my voice low, not wanting to get her into trouble for talking so familiarly to me. I could only imagine the courage it took for her to ask me such a question. I want to go there so badly, she whispered, daring to glance at me with shining, eager eyes. I admired the way her hair was shaved close on one side. She would fit in well in the city. Her slight body with its rudimentary penis entered into the virtual schema and enjoyed by many. I told her so, in a low monotone. She trembled with joy as she opened a large set of metal doors. Gavis was working at a desktop controller, her fingers tracing the touchscreen as she planned the next day's rotation. She heard me enter and glanced up with a welcoming smile. Commander Isaac, welcome. Commander, I said politely as the officer closed the door, leaving us alone. Gavis rose and moved around the desk to hug me. Emtha, you work too hard, travel too much. When are you going to give up that hectic lifestyle and come here to work for me? I laughed. Now, Gavis, you know I could never pass the physical, even for office work. We'd get you there, she assured me as she indicated a chair next to the desk. And Cleo, how is your beautiful companion? I sat and crossed my legs, straightening the pressed creases on my uniform trousers. She is well, mentions you often. She should. We message enough, I replied jovially. Gavis laughed along with me. Everything's ready, she said, handing me the full disclosure. I slipped the chip into the breast pocket of my uniform jacket. I would study it later in my room. So, no infractions? She shook her head, smiling as she spread her hands. You tell me, oh exalted Inspector Commander Isaac. I chuckled. Stop that foolishness. And I will, don't you worry. You'll get no preferential treatment. So, I guess you can't stay with us while you're here? Nope. Ethics violation. You wine and dine me, and then I say your facility is perfect. It's bad enough the council knows we attended academy together. Flags are already raised on that. I understand, Gavis said. If you find no problems, they would never know why you made that determination, whether it was valid. Exactly. Besides, you know I only stay in pleasure drones. Suppose some sweet young thing needs my special attention. My mind flew to Gavis's marcher. I was dying to ask her about the soldier, but worried that openly experiencing one of her marchers might be an ethics violation as well. Gavis sighed and rubbed her cropped hair. To be as young as you. Don't give me that. I know Cleo. Experienced her quite some time ago while in primary. She is insatiable and will keep you young. Gavis smiled at me. All consorts are insatiable. I need to hide my chip from time to time just to have a rest. We poor patrons don't stand a chance when it comes to satisfying them. You'll get no argument there, I agreed, smiling. So is your line all engineered women now? Gavis nodded and pressed a button on the console. The south wall lifted, flooding the room with late afternoon sunlight, and I could see the marchers spaced out across the boundary that separated our peace-vested state from those who would do us harm. The black uniforms of the soldiers far away looked like pinpricks in the distance, while others were so close I could see their chests move as they sucked in air. They are. Research bore out that they react more intuitively to a threat. Older genders tend to be more intimidating. And of course, they aren't as tall. I rose and moved to the glass wall. I looked for her, my soldier, even realizing there was no way she could have traveled the entire boundary this quickly. The hum sounded and the line of marchers moved to my left. Gavis moved to stand next to me and look outside. Yes, there's that. I sighed and realized I needed to get to work. They're quite impressive, Gavis, well-trained. I'm pleased. I took her hand and pressed it between mine in farewell. I will tour now, and after seeing the disclosure, I'll be back tomorrow with questions, if I have any. Gavis pressed back in the customary response. Wander at will. Let me know if you need anything. I left the office and spent the next 20 rotations watching her facility in action. It was a well-oiled machine. I saw no openings inside for terrorists to exploit. My two junior inspectors were on scooters examining the line and reported periodically that all was in order. The interior combat rooms were impeccably well furnished and filled with drillers working marchers into almost superhuman killing machines. I watched them a long time, marveling at the power coiled within their sweaty, scantily clad bodies. My report to the council would be favorable. I felt sure that Gavis and her crew spent every bit of the council funding on training and maintenance. There was no corruption here. As I stood by the back doorway making notes into my unit, the wall receded and a row of marchers came inside, bringing with them the heat and the cinnamon scent of the sand from outside. I inhaled deeply as they passed by, their helmets in their hands. The marchers were all of the same type, bred from muscle tone and commanding appearance. Their heights averaged 12 inches above most of the civilian population, but as they came through the wide opening, I saw them simply as the beautiful, determined women they were. She came up to me and rested at my side as I stood there watching the others. I turned and saw finally that her eyes were deep brown and kind, her face tanned and lean. She smiled at me with white, even teeth, and cute wrinkles appeared alongside her mouth and eyes. It was thrilling to see her without the helmet. I glanced around and noted that none of her fellow marchers had given us any undue interest. They stood in small groups, chit-chatting idly as they prepared to leave duty. My name is Nora, she said in a low voice that made ripples gather at the base of my spine. She used long fingers to brush back the layers of her damp, dark hair. Emtha, I replied. I cleared my throat. Commander Emtha, Isaac. Ah, you're the inspector. I wondered who you were. I turned so she could read the insignia on my shoulder plate. I smiled. Ah, Inspector 3rd grade. Impressive. I shook my head. Not so important. I've just been doing it since academy. You look young. I could see the hunger in her eyes then. Dinner? I asked. She studied me. And breakfast? She countered. I looked up at her and smiled my most inviting smile. Of course, if you wish. Oh, I wish, she said softly, causing a burning to ignite down below. I pulled a rendezvous from my pocket. Later, she said, pressing my hand. Her touch flew through me like quicksilver, and I began to gasp for air as if overheated. Where can I find you? Caresses. Do you know it? I'll find it. She stood, took both my hands in hers, and pressed her farewell. Then she strode away, her long black-clad legs carrying her easily through her crewmates. Many took her hands in farewell, but she didn't linger, simply smiling and moving along. I admired her presence, her graceful economy of movement. Nora. I bathed carefully, adding scent and pheromones. I wanted to please her in real time as well as virtual. As the dinner hour approached, I grew unusually nervous, checking the coupling chamber several times. I lit glow candles and set soft music playing. The couches here at Caresses were larger than most, with extra padding and sides that sloped in as if cocooning the user. I'd used them before and had enjoyed that aspect. The headsets were top of the line as well and were always clean and sweet-smelling. I would delay no longer. Everything was as prepared as I could make it. I went downstairs. The dining room wasn't crowded. It was the off-season, and most local residents were on work rotation. I found a table that was visible from the entry alcove and took a seat. I didn't wait long. I knew her the minute she entered, and it wasn't just the fresh, crisp marcher uniform. Even though her hair was now dry and fell in a cascade that hid one side of her face, I knew her by her tallness and the confident movement of her body. She saw me and waved, and I knew her smile as well. "Emtha," she said in simple greeting as she tucked her hair behind her ear. She took my hands and pressed her mouth to them in a lingering kiss. I loved the dry, heated feel of her lips against my flesh. "Nora," I breathed her name as if whispering a prayer. I never tasted the food. We ate lightly as we conversed, getting to know one another. Her life was quiet, very different from mine. She'd lived in Coronet for most of her young life, joining the marcher training at 11, the typical age. Since then, she had lived alone at the north end of Barrack 300. I discovered she was a reader with more than 3,500 books on her unit. I was impressed. I had considered myself well-read, but only carried 2,200. We had similar reading interests, which for some odd reason surprised and stimulated me. I felt her on every inch of my skin. There was a strange stirring within me, far different from what I'd felt for other women. I felt wetness at armpit and groin, and sweat beaded on my upper lip. My reaction to Nora puzzled me. "Shall we go up?" Nora asked gently after what felt like ages. I nodded and took her hand. The elevator was unbearably slow as Nora gazed into my eyes. I saw so many sultry promises there. I ached for my couch and for the release I would find there with this beautiful woman. I offered her whiskey, but she shook her head, smiled seductively, and pulled me through the sleeping couches and into the coupling chamber. She placed her rendezvous chip in my palm, and I handed her mine. I took the couch to her left, and we settled in, sliding into the headsets. I inserted her chip and waited, staring up into the muted light of the headset. Inserting both our chips into the same virtual setup would make the experience that much more intense. I gripped my thighs together in excitement, the pressure against my engorged clit making me moan slightly. Then I saw her. She flickered into being and turned to me in full dimension. She smiled, and I was lost. One of her broad, strong hands stroked along my arm, and my clothing fell away, seeming to follow her hand. The hand moved inward and cupped my uncovered breast reverently. Her eyes, when they lifted to me, were deep and darkened by desire. Her kiss fell on me and pulled me down into a wanton sea of heat. Her tongue plundered me, and my body reacted almost violently to the experience. My pelvis lifted and rotated against the roughness of her uniform, and we fell together, spinning until we stopped against a soft, virtual surface. I felt her thumb strumming the taut peak of my breast, and I felt the music between my legs. The sound of the sea filled me suddenly, and waves lapped against my clit. I never knew how much I liked kisses, I muttered against her lips as I pulled her uniform away, ripping it from her broad back in one smooth movement. The kisses continued as she smiled against my mouth. "Now we know," she whispered, tongue pushing insistently between my teeth. I felt encased in her kisses, held safe in a passionate web of growing ardor. I never wanted them to stop, unusual for me. I was usually more concerned with other aspects of a coupling, but with Nora I never wanted the kisses to end. Indeed, when she made ready to move lower, I clutched at her and sought her lips again, falling easily into the cradle of sensation she was creating for me. Her arms were strong about me and we spun gently together, her thigh nestled between mine. The heavy muscle of her thigh moved upward and pressed against my center, causing new wetness to pour from me. She pulled her mouth away and chuckled, pressing her wet hip more firmly against my clit, her thigh sliding across my slick opening. I pressed against her, yearning and seeking release. My moans and gasps were loud in my own ears. I pulled back and looked at her face. Her eyes were dark but blurred by the problem. A too-close visual always caused blurring, a system bug that irked me. I forced the distracting thought from my mind as I studied her, glad I could see the harsh planes of her face, a face which had been transformed by her own need. She pressed against me, our gazes fixed. I was lost then in a soul-shattering orgasm ripped through me. I arched against the virtual Nora, my curved form reaching heavenward. My teeth ground together until my jaws hurt and nonsensical sounds were escaping my clenched lips. I'd never felt such power. Nora threw back her head and her mouth opened as though she felt it with me. I shuddered and fell back, panting and swooning. A sudden sensation of closeness puckered my skin. I sensed a new localized heat, a soft fall of hair, the scent of cinnamon. I felt the headset sweat away off my face. My arms flew open, my eyes flew open, and she was there preparing to lift me into her own arms, her hard body pressing toward me. Nora, you can't. It's not the way. Her hot hand rested on my waist, and her eyes hovered above mine, questioning. I saw the desire clearly. I saw the warmth of her gaze. I felt her need rain down from her gaze and deep into me. I shifted, making more room for her to wrap her arms about me. I offered my lips. We kissed, and the real taste of her pelted my senses, waking them keenly. Nora lifted me easily into her arms, and I buried my face in the rough fabric of her uniform. She smelled heavenly. She stood me next to my sleeping couch. Her tanned hands moved to my shoulders and loosened the clasp of my jacket. She slipped it away. My trousers followed under her capable hands. Then my undergarment. I'd never been totally naked in front of anyone before, and I found it exhilarating. She watched me, her breathing harsh. I knew that this was the first time for her as well. As if by their own volition, my hands sought the fasteners on her uniform. I needed her to be naked with me. I wanted to see her beauty. And she was beautiful, so much more beautiful than her virtual schema. My mind registered surprise. She'd kept her hair in real time. I was fascinated and craved to touch it. Instead, I touched her face tenderly, my heart pounding in my chest because I wanted her so badly. I pulled her onto my couch. And the kisses began. Oh, the kisses. So much more than we had experienced on the virtual couches. I hadn't thought they could be better, but now I knew there was no comparison. I lifted my pelvis to her, and her hands slid down between us to find my wetness. Her fingers teased there, finding resistance. She paused, as if understanding that I'd never been penetrated before. This old type of love was new for me. Have you? I asked, wondering if breaking the convention of civilization was common here. Her breathing was heavy. No, she whispered. Never. I thought for a brief moment. I pressed my hand to hers, insisting she penetrate me. The push forced all the air from my lungs, and she waited as I gasped for air, for composure. There was little pain, but certainly the fulfillment of a desire I'd had my whole adult life. Giving me no further time to think, her fingers retreated and pressed again, one thumb escaping to tease my clit repeatedly. I was still shuddering from the old release, even as the new orgasm seated itself. She wrapped powerful legs around me, pressing her center close. I felt the mat of curly hair there. I had to touch it. Wriggling one arm loose, I explored as Nora stilled. My hands traced the long, hard angles of her body, which melted into the softness of her lower belly and the fur of her sex. My fingers lingered there, frolicking in the soft curls. Hair. I spoke against her neck, entranced by the novelty. Yeah, she spoke next to my ear, her voice tight. Is it okay? Her hand writhed within me, making me gasp from the renewed sensation. I touched her protruding clit, rubbing it gently. Her breath caught. Fuck me, Nora, now. I want to belong to you, I whispered. The request was low against her ear. She shuddered, then rose and knelt above me. I marveled at her again, the real her, towering above me. I reached and touched the ridges of muscle that framed her abdomen. They felt better than I had imagined. I studied her small breasts and wanted the prominent nipples in my mouth. The darkness at the apex of her thighs mesmerized me. She pushed her fingers into me, rotating her hand with gentle insistence. The weight of her whole body regulated the gentle, slow thrusts of her powerful arm. I grunted with each thrust and looked down so I could watch. We watched her fuck me together, her hand expanding me until she was able to curl her palm into a cup within me, pressing upward. The explosive heat in my psyche expanded as my eyes feasted. Then I could watch no longer. Instead, I took firm steps toward a bright abyss of pleasure, one that I stepped into gratefully. I came back to my senses to find Nora resting beside me, holding me, kissing my neck. Her bloody hand rested on my stomach, and I could smell the coppery animal scent of it. She was trembling, and I held her close. "Are you afraid?" I whispered. She nodded and buried her face in my neck. "Of me? That it'll hurt?" She shook her head. I sighed, understanding finally. "Oh, that I'll tell." I glanced over at the discarded headset and couches, knowing that this was infinitely better, our own special secret. I reached low and found her needy clit and stroked it. "My beautiful rebel," I muttered. "It'll be our secret." She sighed against me. I indulged my desire and sucked her nipples into my mouth, one after the other. I enjoyed the hiss of her inbound breath as they grew firmer beneath my lips and tongue. My fingers sank into her shallow wetness and teased there, drawing moisture high to smooth my passage over and around her clit. She tensed beneath my touch. I felt throbbing there, and her moans let me know she was close. I increased my pressure, and she pressed her hips harder, rhythmically, into my hand. I sucked one nipple into my mouth and let it go, flicking it into coolness with my tongue. Nora sought my kiss, and we fell endlessly into one another. I felt her body convulse beneath my hand, and her moans were muffled against my mouth. I swallowed her cries of pleasure, imagining my mouth taking over the work of my hand. I couldn't wait to actually taste her. That's it.
Dun, dun, dun.
Such rebels. Shame on them.
Good for them.
They broke protocol.
Nothing better than the real thing.
Baby.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing those two wildly divergent tales.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It was wonderful. I really had a good time.